When the lawyer slid the final page of the will across the polished table, my mother, Lisa, leaned back in her leather chair with that slow, satisfied smile she used to flash whenever she thought she'd already won. "Take your time, Sophia," she said, her voice light and syrupy. "We're all family here. The money's going to be split fairly, millions don't change that." My father, Michael, sat beside her, arms crossed, nodding like he'd already spent his share on a new truck and a vacation he never earned. The last time I'd seen them look this smug and certain, I was 16 years old, standing in the doorway of our crumbling rental house, watching their taillights disappear down the street. They left behind an empty refrigerator, a phone with no minutes, and a single sheet of notebook paper that basically read, "Good luck, kid. My name is Sophia," and when my parents walked away from me at 16, the only person who bothered to show up was my uncle, Victor. He didn't hug me or promise everything would be okay. He just looked at the mess of our apartment, then at me, and said, "Pack what matters. We're gone in 20 minutes. He took me in, pushed me harder than anyone ever had, and helped me build a life where the bills got paid because I paid them, where the lights stayed on because I turned them on. Years later, that same life had me sitting in a sleek downtown Chicago conference room, staring across the table at the two people who'd once thrown me away like yesterday's trash, now pretending they'd been the ones who raised me right. Lisa smiled at the lawyer, that bright, practiced smile she used to reserve for church potlucks and scratch-off tickets. "Come on," she said, "let's not drag this out. We're all adults." But it was already dragging, and it was about to get a lot messy. The lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, cleared his throat, turned to the very last page, and began reading a section my parents didn't even know was there. Their smiles hardened into something brittle before he reached the end of the first paragraph. They had walked in expecting an easy windfall. They had no clue Victor had left behind one final, perfectly engineered trap, a secret clause that didn't just block their payday, it demolished the entire fantasy they'd built around it. Stay with me, because what he wrote there didn't merely disappoint them. It shattered the lives they'd tried to rebuild on borrowed time. Before they left, our life in that small town along the edge of Lake Michigan looked almost normal from the sidewalk. Barbecue smoke drifting between houses on summer evenings, kids racing bikes down cracked streets, neighbors waving from porches. Inside our walls, it was something else entirely. My father, Michael, was supposed to be fixing cars at the local garage, but most Fridays he vanished into the neon glow of the casino and came home reeking of cheap whiskey and bad decisions. My mother, Lisa, worked checkout at the grocery store for a while, then gradually stopped showing up at all. She spent her days melted into the couch, phone in one hand, remote in the other, barely registering when I walked through the door. For a little while we still had our small rituals. Sunday pancakes with whatever syrup was left in the bottle, movie nights on the sagging sofa with discount popcorn. Then the fights over money grew louder. Bills stacked like accusations on the kitchen counter. The fridge went from crowded to half-empty to echoing. Lisa would gesture vaguely toward the pantry and say, "There's mac and cheese. You'll survive." So I started working after school at the little ice cream stand on Main Street, scooping cones for kids whose parents never had to count change for dinner. Every paycheck I brought home went straight to my mother. It vanished into gas, cigarettes, and whatever Michael lost at the tables that weekend. One freezing Tuesday in January, I woke up to a house that felt too quiet. No television muttering in the background, no clatter of dishes, no half-hearted shouting about whose turn it was to buy milk. Their bedroom door stood open. The bed was made, something that almost never happened. Most of their clothes were missing from the closet. In the kitchen, the fridge bulb glowed over a half-gallon of milk gone chunky and a bag of wilted carrots. On the table sat one folded piece of paper with my name scrawled across it in Lisa's hurried handwriting. "Sophia, we can't keep doing this. Your uncle will take you in. We're sorry. Take care of yourself." I read it until the letters swam. There was no cash, no phone numbers, no plan. Their cells went straight to voicemail. By the third day the landlord was pounding on the door, demanding rent I didn't have. When I told him my parents were gone, he stared at me like I was making it up. "You're 16, he said. "You can't live here by yourself. Pay up or I'm calling the county." In the end, I was the one who called. I walked into the school counselor's office with shaking hands and told her the whole story. Within hours a caseworker arrived at the apartment, calm, clipboard in hand, eyes that had seen worse. She photographed the empty shelves, the note, the overdue notices taped to the fridge. Then she said the sentence that changed everything: "We've reached a relative. He's willing to take custody." That was the first time anyone ever said Victor's name like it carried weight for me. My father's older brother. The one my parents always described as cold, obsessed with computers and code, the one who'd forgotten what family even means. When he showed up, he didn't offer hugs or soft words. He surveyed the peeling wallpaper, the stained carpet, the sagging couch, then looked straight at me. "Pack what you actually need," he said. "We're leaving in 15. I grabbed a duffel, threw in clothes, school books, and the one old photo I still had of the four of us smiling at a county fair. Everything else stayed behind. As I followed him out to his quiet black sedan, I didn't know whether I was being saved or simply moved to a different cage. All I knew was that the people who were supposed to stay had vanished, and a stranger who shared blood had decided I was now his problem. Chicago hit me like a cold slap the first time I saw it through the windshield. Endless ribbons of highway lights, glass towers stabbing the sky, everything moving too fast for my brain to catch up. Victor drove the whole way in near silence, hands steady at 10 and 2, the engine so quiet I could hear my own pulse thumping in my ears. When we finally peeled off the interstate into a hushed suburb, I thought for sure he'd made a wrong turn. The streets here were smooth, the lawns clipped like magazine photos, houses with wide windows that actually looked clean. His place was modern and sharp, clean angles, dark trim, a driveway without a single oil stain. Inside smelled faintly of coffee and cedar, nothing like the stale mix of cigarette smoke and yesterday's dinner I'd grown up with. "Shoes off at the door," he said, already kicking his own into a neat tray. "We keep things orderly here." I nodded, clutching my duffel bag like it might run away if I let go. He led me down a hallway to a guest room that was suddenly mine, crisp white sheets on a real bed, an empty desk, a closet that didn't smell like someone else's life. "You'll start school Monday," he said. "But first we establish structure." Structure. That word became Victor's religion. Over the next week he mapped out my days like lines of code: wake at 6:30, breakfast at 7 o'clock, school drop-off, homework block from 4 to 6 o'clock, 1 hour every evening on something useful, usually an online course in basic programming, logic, or time management. Dinner at 7 o'clock sharp. No screens at the table. Bed by 10:30 unless homework demanded more, and even then, lights out by midnight. I tested the boundaries early. Forgot dinner once on purpose. Pretended my alarm didn't go off. Snapped at him for treating me like a project instead of a person. He never shouted. He simply adjusted the consequences with the calm precision of someone debugging software. Late for dinner? Streaming privileges revoked for the week. Used his work computer without permission? Internet restricted to the kitchen only, in plain sight. "That's not fair," I said once after he cut my phone data for 3 days over a missed curfew. "Fairness is a luxury," he replied without looking up from his screen. "Consequences are physics. I'm teaching you to control the variables you can." I pushed harder at first, then softer, then eventually stopped pushing. The house stopped feeling like a sterile hotel and started feeling like something more dangerous: stability. On weekends he occasionally brought me to his downtown office. While he sat in glass-walled rooms discussing penetration tests and compliance audits, I sat in a corner with textbooks, pretending not to eavesdrop. But I watched. I saw how he listened when others argued, how he asked one quiet question that flipped the entire conversation. On the drive home one evening I finally asked, "How did you know that consultant was fudging the timeline?" Victor glanced at me in the rearview. He kept looking at his watch when I mentioned liquidated damages. Truthful people get irritated when you question them. liars get anxious. It was the closest thing to fatherly advice he'd given me yet. A few weeks in, I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, scrolling through the handful of old photos on my cracked phone. Pancakes on Sunday. Michael with his arm around me at a school concert. Moments that felt like lies now. My throat tightened, my eyes burned, and before I could stop it, tears spilled over. I didn't hear Victor until he spoke from the doorway. Sophia. I swiped at my face. I'm fine. He didn't argue. He just stepped inside, placed a box of tissues on the nightstand, and lowered himself into the desk chair across from me. He didn't ask what was wrong. Didn't promise it would pass. He simply stayed, 10 minutes, then 20, until the storm in my chest quieted enough for me to breathe. When I finally looked up, he stood. School tomorrow, he said. Try to rest. We'll talk about advanced placement soon. You can do more than survive. After he left, I lay staring at the ceiling, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the furnace. My parents had abandoned me with a note and spoiled milk. Victor had given me boundaries, routines, and the silent presence of someone who wasn't going anywhere. I still didn't trust it completely, but for the first time since the note, my life had edges instead of chaos. Victor never believed in settling for average, especially not when it came to school. A month after I moved in, he placed a thick envelope on the table while I was eating spaghetti. Placement exams, he said. You're not staying in the district public system. You're capable of better. I wanted to roll my eyes, but when I opened the packet, the questions were challenging in a way that made something spark inside me. Not impossible, just hard enough to demand focus. 6 weeks later I walked through the doors of Lakeside Academy, a private school where the student parking lot looked like a luxury dealership and kids casually mentioned summer internships in London. My second-hand jeans and faded backpack screamed outsider. In my old school, attendance was effort. Here, teachers distributed syllabi that read like business proposals, and classmates debated concepts like scalability and disruptive innovation without irony. The workload was relentless: honors calculus, intro to computer science, literature seminars, semester-long group projects. I swallowed my pride and showed Victor my first report card, mostly BS with a couple of CS. I'm not like them, I muttered. They've had tutors since kindergarten. He scanned the page, then set it down. Correct. Now you see the distance. Data is useless unless you close the gap. Instead of sympathy, he gave me a spreadsheet, study blocks, office hours, practice problems. Extra screen time or weekend outings became incentives tied to measurable progress. When I nearly bombed my first coding assignment, he didn't pat my head and call me brilliant. He pulled up a chair at the kitchen island, opened his laptop, and said, "Walk me through your code. Show me where it breaks." We traced every error until I understood. Failure isn't final, he said, shutting the lid. It's diagnostic information. Act on it. Bit by bit, I adapted. I formed a small study group with kids who respected effort instead of mocking it. I stopped flinching when professors called on me. By senior year I was near the top of my AP computer science class, a surreal accomplishment for the girl who'd once done homework with the TV blaring to drown out the arguments. Then came college applications. I circled safety schools near Chicago, places I could commute to, stay close to the only steady thing I'd ever known. Victor circled Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon. You're delusional, I told him. Delusion is staying small because it's comfortable, he replied. Pick the category you want to belong to, the ones who claw their way up, or the ones who never try. We fought. I said I didn't want to leave. He said comfort was the enemy of growth. One night, after a particularly sharp argument, he sat at the dining table and spoke quietly about something he'd never mentioned before. My brother, your father, was brilliant with machines, he said. Could have engineered anything. Instead he chased fast money, shortcuts, the next big score. I watched him waste every real chance he had. I won't watch it happen again. I applied. Months later, while studying in the library, an email pinged. I opened it and stared. Stanford. Accepted. Full ride. Victor read the letter without expression, then handed me a new laptop the following week. A tool, he said. Not a distraction. Use it to build. College hit like stepping off a quiet porch into a hurricane. Palo Alto sun, palm trees that looked fake, classmates who talked about venture capital the way my old neighbors talked about football. I carried Victor's voice in my head through every all-nighter, every group project where trust fund kids tried to coast on charisma, every networking mixer where I felt like an imposter and borrowed confidence. I interned at 2 startups in Silicon Valley, learned to read pitch decks the way Victor read contracts, learned to speak the language of equity and burn rate without flinching. When graduation came, the offers rolled in, big tech names on both coasts, salaries that made my head spin, signing bonuses that could have bought our old house twice over. I turned them all down. Instead, I booked a flight back to Chicago, walked into Victor's office on a Tuesday morning, and told him I wanted to work for him. Not as family. As an employee. He studied me across the desk for a long moment. Then you're not my niece here, he said. You're entry level. You start where everyone else starts. You earn every inch. I did. I wrote code, fixed bugs at 2 a.m., sat through meetings where people twice my age talked over me, made mistakes, owned them, fixed them faster the next time. I led small projects, then bigger ones. By 28 I was running major client engagements, steering our company toward next-generation cloud security and early AI-driven threat detection, the kind of moves that turned heads at investor dinners and made valuation discussions get very serious. It felt like closing a circle. The girl who'd once stared at an empty fridge had become someone people listened to in boardrooms. I thought the past was finally just background noise, a story I could tell without the ache. I was wrong. Life has a way of reminding you that nothing stays locked away forever. It started on an ordinary Thursday. I got home late from a client call, still buzzing from closing a 7-figure deal, and found Victor at the dining table. 2 plates already set, steak and asparagus cooling under the overhead light. Victor never waited for anyone. If you were late, you ate alone. That night he had waited. You're 7 minutes behind schedule, he said, but there was no edge in it, just a tired half-smile. We ate quietly at first, the way we often did, both of us mentally replaying the day. Then he set his fork down, folded his hands, and looked at me in a way that made my stomach drop. Sophia, he said. I got the scans back. I tried to laugh it off. You finally went to the doctor? He didn't smile. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. They can't cure it. They can try to buy time. The words landed like they belonged in someone else's story. I waited for the punchline, the part where he said it was a mistake. Victor didn't do jokes. Okay, I managed. So, what now? His answer was the most Victor thing possible. We treat it like any other critical project. Finite timeline. Ruthless prioritization. Within days he had a binder on the counter, color-coded tabs for appointments, clinical trials, second opinions, palliative timelines. I sat with him in sterile waiting rooms while he grilled oncologists with the same precision he used on auditors. Chemo became part of the calendar. I drove him to one of the best cancer centers in the city, kept a running log of side effects, fought insurance on pre-authorizations like they were personal insults. At home I learned to cook the few things he could still keep down, bland broths, ginger tea, small portions of rice. I organized his meds the way I organized server deployments, redundant checks, no room for error. At the office the shift was even more dramatic. Victor started handing me pieces of the company he'd always guarded. First a few meetings he was too weak to attend. Then whole accounts. Then budget sign-off. Then strategy sessions with the board. You're already carrying most of it, he said one afternoon as we sat in his corner office, the Chicago skyline glittering behind us. We might as well make it official. He reminded me of something that had happened years earlier. Right after I turned 18, he'd driven me to the courthouse on a rainy Monday morning, handed me a pen, and had me sign papers that made him my legal adoptive father. "You're not a guest here," he'd said back then. "You're my responsibility." This just makes the paperwork match the reality. Now, facing a deadline no one wants, he was doing the same thing with the business. Matching paperwork to reality. "The company will be fine," he told me. "You understand the architecture and the why behind it. That's more than most people in this building ever will." His body failed faster than his mind. Some evenings he'd sit in the recliner with a throw blanket over his knees, laptop open, listening while I walked him through revenue forecasts and hiring plans. Other nights he closed the screen and asked questions he'd never had time for before. "Are you happy?" he asked once, voice thinner than usual. "Not with the work. With the life." I thought of the girl who'd woken up to spoiled milk and a goodbye note. "Yeah," I said. "I am. Because you showed up." A faint smile touched his lips. "Good. Then I didn't completely screw it up." 10 months after that first conversation at the dinner table, Victor died at home the way he'd planned. No hospital machines, no last-minute heroics. Just the soft hum of the house and my hand around his until the breathing stopped. The funeral was small, deliberate, like him. A handful of distant relatives. A crowd of colleagues and clients in dark suits and quiet grief. People spoke about his discipline, his ability to spot the single flawed line in a 1,000-page agreement. When it was my turn, I didn't talk about revenue or acquisitions. I talked about a man who walked into a broken childhood and refused to let it stay broken. About chaos turned into schedules, survival turned into ambition, absence turned into presence. After the last guest left, I stood by the grave alone, breath fogging in the November air. The person my parents called cold and distant had been the only one who stayed. A few weeks later, when the sharpest grief had dulled into a constant wait, the lawyer called. Mr. Reynolds wanted me in for the will reading. I expected something straightforward: house to me, company shares, maybe a few bequests to charity. Victor had never been sentimental about money. It was a tool, like the laptop he'd handed me the week I got into Stanford. I never imagined walking into that conference room and finding Lisa and Michael already seated, dressed like they'd come to sign a winning lottery ticket. For one frozen second I thought I'd opened the wrong door. There sat Lisa in a navy dress that looked brand new and expensive, hair smoothed into a low bun, makeup perfect like she was auditioning for a daytime talk show. Michael beside her in a charcoal suit that strained slightly at the shoulders, tugging at his cuffs as if he wore one every day. They both turned when I walked in. "Sophia," Lisa said, voice bright and loud, the way she used to call across the grocery store parking lot when she wanted me to hurry up. "Look at you. So grown up. So successful." Michael gave an awkward chuckle. "We're really proud of you, kid." Proud. The word landed like a bad joke. I didn't smile back. Mr. Reynolds, the lawyer, gestured to the empty chair on the opposite side of the long table. I took it, keeping the polished wood between us like a shield. Lisa glanced around the room, the dark wood paneling, the city view through floor-to-ceiling glass, then back at me with exaggerated sympathy. "This must be overwhelming, honey. All this, the house, the company, the accounts. So much to handle alone." Michael nodded on cue. "Assets," he added helpfully. "Yeah, a lot of assets." Lisa leaned forward, smiling like we were sharing a secret. "Don't worry. We're family. We'll figure it out together. We'll share the millions. That's how it works, right?" There it was. No hello that meant anything. No apology. No trace of the years they'd been gone. Just straight to the money, as if the last 12 years had been a minor misunderstanding. Mr. Reynolds adjusted his glasses. "If everyone is ready, we'll begin." He started with the standard language: Victor's full name, date of the will, statements of sound mind. My parents barely listened. Their eyes were waiting for numbers. When he reached the dispositions, the air in the room changed. The primary residence in the suburbs. The lake house up north. Various brokerage accounts. Then the big one, 80% of the equity in the cybersecurity firm Victor had founded and grown from a basement operation into a 9-figure business. All of that, Mr. Reynolds said evenly, is bequeathed to Sophia Harper in full and absolute ownership. The silence was sudden and thick. Lisa blinked rapidly. Michael frowned. Like he'd misheard the total. I'm sorry, Michael said, voice rising a little. All of it? That can't be right. We're his family. Lisa recovered faster. She leaned in, hands folded neatly. We don't want to cause trouble, she said, tone reasonable now. But obviously we should be involved. She's young. Managing millions requires guidance. Family guidance. The word guidance hit like a spark on dry grass. I felt something inside me snap clean in half. Guidance? I repeated, voice low. Is that what you call leaving a 16-year-old with a spoiled carton of milk, a goodbye note, and a landlord about to change the locks? Lisa's smile flickered but held. We were struggling, Sophia. We knew Victor would step in. We did what we thought was best. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat gently, pulling attention back to him. There are additional provisions Mr. Harper instructed me to address should this exact scenario arise. Michael's head jerked up. What scenario? The lawyer opened a thinner folder. First, 9 years ago, on Sophia's 18th birthday, Mr. Harper formally adopted her. Legally, she is his daughter and sole heir. He let the statement settle. Michael's face flushed dark red. He stole our kid, he muttered. We never agreed to that. Mr. Reynolds slid a document across the table. You signed the consent forms. I have the originals, and you were provided copies. Lisa glanced at the paper, then pushed it away. We didn't understand. We thought it was just temporary. It was permanent, Mr. Reynolds said. And your subsequent conduct made the court's decision straightforward. He opened another file, this one containing printed email threads. Mr. Harper also directed that I disclose, if necessary, the communications he received from you over the years. Requests for money. Threats to appear at his office. Demands that he pay what he owes or you'd tell everyone what kind of man he really is. Lisa shot to her feet. Those were private. They were preserved, Mr. Reynolds replied calmly, because Mr. Harper anticipated this exact return. Which brings us to the final clause. My parents froze. They could feel the trap closing, even if they didn't know the shape yet. In the event any party with legal standing attempts to contest this will or challenge the distribution of assets through litigation, Mr. Reynolds continued, the entirety of the estate, every property, every account, every share, will be liquidated and transferred in full to the Harper Pediatric Oncology Fund, a charitable foundation established to support children with cancer and their families. He folded his hands. In plain terms, if anyone sues for a piece of this estate, no one receives anything. Not even Sophia. The assets go directly to sick children. The room went so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the HVAC. Michael barked a short, harsh laugh. He can't do that. That's crazy. He can, Mr. Reynolds said. And he did. The clause has been drafted, reviewed, and upheld as enforceable. Lisa turned to me, the polite mask gone, eyes glittering. You wouldn't let that happen, she said, voice low and urgent. You wouldn't throw away everything just to spite your own parents. I met her gaze. You lost the right to call yourselves my parents the day you drove away and left me with 37 cents and an eviction notice. Victor made sure you could never take what he built. She slammed her palm on the table. We raised you. We changed your diapers. We sacrificed, you left me with nothing, I cut in quietly. And you only came back when you heard the word millions. Mr. Reynolds closed the folder with a soft final sound. There is no provision for you here. You are not named as beneficiaries. You have no legal claim. And any attempt to create one will trigger the charitable transfer. Michael shoved his chair back so hard it screeched across the floor. We'll see about that. We'll get our own lawyer. This isn't finished. Lisa stood too, pointing a trembling finger at me. You'll regret choosing him over your real family. You only remember the word family when there's money on the table, I said. Funny how that works. Mr. Reynolds pressed a small button under the table edge. Seconds later a security officer appeared in the doorway, tall, calm, expressionless. Everything all right, sir? Yes, Mr. Reynolds answered. But the meeting has concluded. Please escort our guests out. I watched as my parents were walked out, still spitting half-sentences and threats, past the receptionist and a few junior staff who pretended not to stare. For the first time I truly understood the depth of what Victor had done. He hadn't just left me wealth. He'd built a fortress around my future and wired a dead man's switch into his will so their greed could never breach it. Of course they didn't disappear quietly. A week after the will reading, an email landed in my inbox from a law firm I'd never heard of. Polite on the surface, but the subtext was clear. They wanted to explore amicable options for renegotiation and ensure equitable distribution among family members. They'd obviously already been told by someone knowledgeable that the will was airtight. This was a fishing expedition, hoping I'd panic and offer something just to make them go away. They got nothing. Mr. Reynolds replied on my behalf within the hour. He attached the final clause again, this time with a concise note: any formal challenge will result in Sophia joining the firm in petitioning for immediate execution of the charitable transfer provision. The response was silence from their side. The lawyers knew better. My parents, however, did not. Blocked numbers started calling. Tearful voicemails arrived at odd hours, Lisa crying about how sick Michael was, how the heating bill was overdue, how they were just asking for a little help to get back on our feet. Finally, a text from her personal phone: can we meet for dinner? Just to talk. Like family. Please. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it and block her again. Another part, the part that still remembered being 16 and hoping they'd come back, wondered if there was anything left to say. In a moment I still can't fully explain, I agreed. One dinner. Public place. No expectations. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant a few blocks from the Loop, dim lights, soft violin music, white tablecloths meant to make people feel generous. They were already seated when I arrived, menus untouched, faces lit by the candle in the center. Lisa stood the second she saw me and grabbed my hand like we hugged every Sunday. You look exhausted, sweetheart, she said, squeezing too tight. All that pressure, running everything alone. It's too much. Michael cleared his throat as I sat. We just need a little help, Sophia. We're behind on a few things, medical stuff, mortgage. If you could spare maybe 200,000, just to catch up. I raised an eyebrow. In the conference room you were talking millions. 200,000 sounds almost reasonable. Almost. Lisa winced, eyes glistening on cue. We were upset. Grief makes people say things they don't mean. Victor was your uncle, but he was our brother-in-law, our family too. You didn't come to the funeral, I said flatly. She looked down at her napkin. Instead of answering, she launched into the story I'd heard in pieces on the voicemails: Michael's back problems, collection letters piling up, the possibility of losing the house. We're not asking for everything, she finished, voice trembling just enough to sound practiced. Just a piece. We're your parents. I set my fork down without touching the food. Parents don't abandon their 16-year-old daughter and then reappear with a calculator the moment money enters the picture. Michael bristled. So that's how it's going to be? You're going to sit on a fortune while we drown? No, I said. I'm going to let you live with the consequences of your choices, the same way you forced me to live with mine. Victor didn't build all this so you could stroll back in and take it. He built protection so you couldn't. Lisa's face hardened, the soft act dissolving. One day you'll need someone, she said quietly. And there won't be anyone left who cares enough to help. I thought of Victor's hand in mine as his breathing slowed. Of the way he'd shown up when the rest of the world hadn't. Someone already did, I told her. He left me tools instead of excuses. That's the difference. I stood, placed enough cash on the table to cover my untouched plate and a generous tip, and walked out. Behind me their voices rose, sharp, overlapping, then faded into the murmur of other diners. I didn't turn around. I thought that would close the chapter. I was wrong. A week later I was in my home office late, reviewing penetration test reports, when the security app pinged, motion at the front gate. I opened the feed without thinking. There they were, Lisa in that same navy dress under a thin jacket, Michael in the wrinkled suit, standing at the wrought iron entrance like they were waiting for an invitation. They tried the code I'd changed months earlier. When it failed, they waited until a delivery car approached, then slipped through behind. It like they'd rehearsed the move. I switched cameras. They walked up the path, Lisa's smile already fixed in place, Michael scanning the house like an appraiser. By the time the doorbell rang, I had the system recording. I opened the door just wide enough to stand in the frame, phone visible in my hand. "You're violating the restraining order," I said, voice steady. "You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of me or this property." Lisa laughed, light and dismissive. "Oh, come on, Sophia. We're just here to talk. No need to make a scene. We're family." Michael tried to look past me into the foyer, the staircase, the art, the quiet evidence of a life built without them. "Nice house," he said. "You really going to keep all this and let us lose everything?" "You lost me at 16, I replied. "The rest is just consequences." Lisa's smile vanished. "We're not leaving until you listen. Until you help." "Then this gets worse for you," I said. I lifted the phone so they could see the screen, the live feed, the red recording indicator. Every word. Every step onto private property. It's saved to the cloud. I stepped back and closed the door. My hand shook, but not from fear. I saved the clip, exported it, and called the police. When the officers arrived, my parents were still in the front yard, arguing loudly with the stone planters like they could shame the house into opening. I watched from the window as the officers approached, spoke to them, then came to me. I showed them the active restraining order, the video timestamped and geotagged, the clear trespass. It was straightforward after that. Trespassing. Violation of a protective order. Refusal to leave when directed. They tried every tactic, Lisa crying, Michael insisting it was just family business, both claiming I was overreacting. The officer stayed calm and professional. Handcuffs clicked. My parents were walked back down the driveway, this time with real legal weight behind the removal. Neighbors watched from porches. Phones came out. The clip spread quietly online.